Let's talk about the ITTOs. First, the inputs. The list starts with project management plan. Let's look at its components. First, scope management plan. The scope management plan documents how the project and product scope will be controlled. Requirements management plan. The requirements management plan describes how the project requirements will be managed. The next one is change management plan. Let's look at the overview first. Change management plan is a document that details how the change should be handled in a project. This document contains the roles and responsibilities of Change Control Board. I hope you remember our earlier discussion. Now, let's get into context. To control the scope, you should know how to manage the changes. The Change Control Management Plan consists of process to manage changes in a project. The next one is Configuration Management Plan. First, the overview. Configuration Management Plan is one of the most confusing terminology among the PMP aspirants. Let's supersimplify it. As the changes happens in the project, the updated version of the project should be documented somewhere, right? You start calling them, for example, version 1, version 2, and so on and so forth. In the original configuration, the project is planned to deliver X. And with the changes, now it's X plus 1. And due to the second change, it's X plus 1 plus the next one, and so on and so forth. What you do here? You configure the project as per the scope. Of course, you cannot configure everything in a project, especially the fundamentals. So, the configuration management plan describes the configurable items in a project, items that require formal change control, and how those changes should be taken through the change control process, how those changes will be recorded and updated so that the product of the project remains consistent with the scope. Here, we are talking about only the configurable items in a project. The reason is, as mentioned earlier, the project fundamentals cannot be changed. If you change the fundamentals, then it changes everything. In those cases, it's better to terminate or close the project and initiate a new project. Configuration management plan. The configuration management plan have the items that are configurable through formal change control process. This information will be helpful to control and manage the project scope. Next is scope baseline. Scope baseline is used to compare the actual results to determine if a change, corrective action, or preventive action is necessary. Performance measurement baseline. Let's look at the overview. Typically, to measure the performance of a project, the baseline is the reference. As the project progresses, without a baseline, you will not be able to know whether the project is progressing as per the plan or not. The baselines are set for scope, schedule, and cost. These three baselines put together are called as performance measurement baseline. As the project progresses, the actual performance is measured against the baseline performance, of course, individually. That is, scope performance is measured against scope baseline, schedule performance is measured against schedule baseline, and cost against cost baseline. Setting up the baseline is done during the planning process. The project performance is measured during monitoring and controlling process. Now, performance measurement baseline in context. Using the earned value analysis, the actual performance is measured against the baseline performance. This helps to determine whether the changes require corrective or preventive actions. The next is project documents. Let's look at the key documents that are relevant to control scope. The first is lessons learned register. You should apply lessons learned from the previous project to improve scope control. Requirements documentation. Requirements documentation is used to detect any deviation in the agreed upon scope for the project or for the product. Requirements traceability matrix. The requirements traceability matrix helps to detect the impact of any change or deviation from the scope baseline on the project objectives. It can also provide status of requirements. Work performance data. The work performance data can include the number of change requests received, the number of requests accepted, and the number of deliverables verified, validated, and completed. The last input is organizational process asserts. Existing policies and procedures that are related to control scope, methods and template related to monitoring and reporting, are the two key inputs used from organizational process asserts during this control scope process. Let's look at the tools and techniques. Data analysis. Variance analysis is the one and only in this process. Let's start with the overview. Variance analysis reviews the difference or variance between the planned and actual performance. The variance can be calculated for duration estimate, cost estimate, resource utilization, resource rates, technical performance, and other metrics. Variance analysis can be done for each knowledge area considering relevant variables. Let's look at the variance analysis in current context. Variance analysis is used to compare the baseline to the actual results and determine if the variance is within the threshold amount or if corrective or preventive action is necessary. The next tools and technique is trend analysis. Let's start with the overview. In trend analysis, you use the past performance to predict the future performance. By predicting the slippage ahead of time, you as a project manager and the project team get prepared with the preventive actions as necessary. The trend analysis also helps to understand whether the project performance is improving or deteriorating. Now, trend analysis in current context. As said earlier, trend analysis examines project performance over time to determine if performance is improving or deteriorating. This helps to understand the cause of variance and its impact in the project scope and decides about corrective and or preventive actions. Let's look at the outputs. First, work performance information. Work performance information indicates how well the project and product scope are progressing with reference to scope baseline. This includes the information such as changes received, identified scope variance, and the cost, how this variance of scope schedule cost will impact the forecasted future performance. This helps the project team to get prepared with corrective and preventive actions. The second one is change request. Based on the project performance analysis, the scope may have to be revisited. The third one is project plan update. Let's look at its components. In the components, scope management plan is the first one. The scope management plan may be updated to reflect how the change in scope is managed. The second one is scope baseline. Upon comparing the actual results against the project results, necessary corrective and or preventive actions are triggered. This resultant changes to the scope baseline are incorporated in response to approved changes in scope, scope statement, the WBS, and the WBS dictionary. In some cases, scope variance can be so severe that a revised scope baseline is needed to provide a realistic basis to measure performance. The next is schedule baseline. Let's quickly look at the overview. A schedule baseline is the approved version of a schedule model that can be changed only through formal change control procedures. The schedule baseline is used as a basis for comparison to actual results. Now, the baseline in current context. Due to approved changes in scope, the schedule baseline needs to be rebaselined. Changes to the schedule baseline are incorporated in response to approved changes in scope, resource, or schedule estimates. In some cases, schedule variance can be so severe that a revisited schedule baseline is needed to provide a realistic basis for performance measurement. The next is cost baseline. Let's look at the overview. Cost baseline is the approved version of project budget. Remember, cost baseline is excluded from the management reserve. When the management reserve is included in the cost baseline, then it's the total project budget. The management reserve can only be changed through formal change request. I know right now it looks a little confusing and you may not be able to understand every term. Don't worry, we will have a dedicated discussion in the upcoming cost management knowledge area about this. So just make a note of it. But for time being, just remember that management reserve is excluded from the cost baseline. If it has to be changed, then it can be done only through, formal change control process. The cost baseline is used to compare the planned cost versus actual cost in a project. This helps to calculate the project performance in terms of cost. Cost baseline is a summation of all the project activities. This picture is from the PMBOK Guide 7.8. Illustrate the various components of the project budget and cost baseline. As I said, just for time being, make a note of it. We will discuss in detail in the upcoming session. While estimating the cost for various project activities, the contingency reserves are also estimated for each activity. This is because different activity may need different contingency reserve. For example, if an activity is at high risk, may need higher contingency reserve, where an activity which is well versed to the organization may need less contingency reserve. It's obvious and logical also, right? So, the cost estimation of an activity always included in the contingency reserve. Since the cost estimation is made from the scheduled activity, this helps to review cost as time-phased review for a particular period of time. What are the activities should have been completed and what should be the cost for those. With this, you can compare the planned cost versus actual cost. This is typically displayed in the form of S-curve as illustrated here. This is again the picture taken from the PMBOK guide, picture number 7.9. For projects that use earned value management, the cost baseline is referred as performance measurement baseline. If you don't understand what is earned value, don't worry, we will have a detailed discussion shortly. You know, there are too many unknown things, but don't worry, we will connect the dots as we move forward. In fact, that's the beauty of project management, right? So many things are interdependent, and that's what makes project management an interesting one. Okay, let's go back. Once the cost is baselined, any change related to cost, what should you do? Yes, you are right. All changes must be carried out only through change control process. Now, cost baseline in current context. Approved changes may have impact on cost, so the cost baseline should be updated. Again, if the cost variance are severe, then cost baseline to be revised to make it realistic. The next is performance measurement baseline. Performance measurement baseline is compared to the actual performance. In case of changes, trigger corrective or preventive action. Again, those changes should be routed through only change control process and do the rebaselining as needed. Let's look at the next one, project documents updates. There are 3 in it. Let's have a quick look at them. Lessons learned register. The lessons learned register is updated with information on changes encountered and how they could have been avoided, as well as approaches that worked well for control scope. Requirements documentation. This may be updated with additional or changed requirements. Requirements traceability matrix. This may be updated to reflect updates in the requirements documentation. All right, that wraps up ITTO. Let's move to the next process. No, not next process, next knowledge area. Because with control scope, we conclude the scope management knowledge area.